So to begin, we are going to sketch out the sun and then the orbiting rings. Now I sped up through this part quite a bit because it took me a really embarrassingly long time to get these rings right. So I'm going to leave the entire process that I went through to get to my final sketch just so you can see how long. And this is sped up times 8. So yeah, this took me quite a bit. I am going to, instead of having you try to follow what I'm doing here, I am going to leave a finished sketch in this post somewhere. I'm going to attach the finished sketch for you. That way you can just copy it, or you can just try to do this on your own. You may have quite an easier time of it than I did. You're going to see here, I think I went through about 2 or 3 passes in order to get these rings just right. So yeah, you might have a much easier time of it than I. If you think you're not going to, I've left the sketch. Good luck. And as we begin most of our paintings, we are going to lay down some water. And I'm just using a wash brush from Princeton. Feel free to use whatever brush is most comfortable for you. And just put a nice layer of water on your paper. Once that's down, just grab any colors. I am not going to tell you exactly what colors to grab. I was just kind of going with what I was feeling at the time. And I wanted a nice soft background. I didn't really want a dark background like I usually work with. So I went with a very watered down version of Magello Mission Blue. Oh God, this is a mess. I went with a very watered down version of Magello's Peacock Blue. I added some hands of yellow to the sun, and you're going to see that to that hands of yellow I add a touch of red. And I think, yes, I add a touch of cadmium red just to warm up that yellow a bit. After I just threw in a couple of dots here and there of red, and then I went back in with a higher concentration of that hands of yellow. And the hands of yellow is by M. Graham. And you're going to see, if your paper is still wet, that the hands of yellow or the yellow that you use is going to start pulling across the paper. And this is the effect that I want, because we're going to merge that glowingness of the sun into the background, into the sky. So if your paper is not pulling that yellow out, then you can help it along. Add a bit of yellow to the outside edge of that sun. And now I'm going to continue adding blue, and you're also going to see me add some green. So that's Viridian by Magello Mission Gold. And I'm also going to add in some purple. And that is Bright Clear Violet, again by Magello Mission Gold. And you're going to see that I'm not going to be using this in really high concentrated doses of it. And if I do, if I accidentally add a little bit too much, at one point I think I add a little bit too much purple, then I just go in and I water it down a bit. When it gets closer to the sun, so where the yellow of the sun is peeking out, I'm going to add a little bit of the blue and or green. We're not adding any purple in that area. We don't want this piece to get muddy. So the yellow is going to blend in really nicely with the blue or green, and that's going to blend in nicely with the blue, and the blue is going to blend in nicely with the purple. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're working on this piece. From the left to the right, it's going to be lighter on the left side where the sun is beaming, and it's going to get considerably darker as it reaches the right side, but not too dark. You can make it dark. I'm not going to tell you not to make it dark, but I wanted to keep this piece a little lighter than I keep most pieces. So you guys have seen me blend and blend a million times, so I'm not going to go too in depth into that process. But what I really like to do is just kind of lay the colors down one on top of the other and let the water blend it out on its own. Allow your piece to fully dry before moving on to the next step. And don't do like me and stick your palm in it, because then the bottom of your piece, as mine did, has a little bit of lifted paint. But we're going to overlook that. All right, now you're going to take your white medium, any kind of white you want. I've always said you can use acrylic, gouache, watercolor, doesn't matter. And we are going to outline every single ring in this piece. The more rings you made, the more rings you outline. So outline them all. You can also use, and if you don't feel like using a tiny brush and your white, you can also just use a white gel pen. And this is also going to serve not only to make the rings kind of glow and stand out, but it's also going to serve to cover your pencil marks. Now we're going to add a little extra glow to the sun, and we're going to do this the way we usually do it around our moons. We're going to take it piece by piece, section by section, outline a section of it, and then with a barely wet brush, pull some of that white out. So for this, you're not going to be able to use a gel pen unless your gel pen is able to be wet. I've never tried it. So if you do, let me know. But pull some of that white out. Don't worry too much about interfering with the lines. Once they have fully dried, they should be able to just kind of stay in place unless you saturate it with water. So try not to do that. Now let's add a couple of planets. So we're going to take this planet by planet. We're going to add, again, this is no particular order. This is all coming out of my imagination. So I'm going to draw a bigger circle somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to completely fill that circle in with white. So again, use acrylic, watercolor, gouache, whichever medium you'd prefer. If you're using a medium that dries and cannot be re-wet, then the next part of it, you're going to work it wet on wet. If you're using a medium such as gouache or watercolor that can be re-wet, then it doesn't matter if you let this completely dry or not. I let mine completely dry before moving on to adding some color to it, but again, it's not necessary. However, if you're using something such as ink or acrylic that cannot be re-wet, then work on adding the color in while the white is still wet. Okay, I am going to start adding the majority of the color to the right side, and I'm going to start with a base of Cutie Pie or French Kiss, one of the two. I'm just going to start with one of the neon bases. Feel free to start with either one that you want. And on top of that, I am going to add a bit of Jasper. And Jasper was one of the mystery colors from June, just to darken it up. I mean, you can get away with adding any other color such as red rock or desert to darken up the brightness of the neon. And I'm just gonna go right over that. And as you can see, I'm leaving the left side of the planet fairly light. I'm going to clean off my brush and dry it on a paper towel, and then go in and start pulling some of that white over. So from here on out, you're going to see that I'm pulling some white over from the left side, and then I'm pulling some color over from the right side. So you'll have a lot of like striations on the planet that you'll see, and it's going to be a little mix of the color and a little mix of the white. Okay, now I'm going to pick another spot that's a little far away from the planet that I just painted, only because I didn't want my helix maker to touch it. That was literally the thought process behind picking the placement for this planet. So I'm going to go in with my Copic Opaque White. And again, refer back to the first planet when I was talking about what white to use and how to use it. So I'm going to again, follow the same process. We're going to follow the same process for all of the little planets that we paint. So I'm going to follow the same process. I'm going to do a base of white, and I am going to leave it wet. And then over that white, I'm going to add a bit of gingerbread. Once my gingerbread is down and we're still going to be working wet on wet, I'm going to add a bit of purple, a bit of my plum good purple. So as you can see here, once I added that purple in, it just sort of spread into the planet. And I wasn't originally going to go with this look, but I absolutely loved the way that that looked. So I left it. I just brushed my watercolor brush over that gingerbread, and it just spread, and I left it. So I'm going to add a bit more. I just want to deepen that a little more, and just let the water and the paint underneath just kind of like mix it and blend it, and oh, it's just beautiful. Don't mess around with it too much. Just put the paint down and let it do its own thing. All right, little planet number 3. So again, just pick a spot. Doesn't matter where it is. I'm gonna go with a smaller one because it's gonna be a little bit closer to the sun. And I'm going to start with the base of white. To that white, I'm going to add a bit of denim, which is a blue color. And again, the same as we did with the plum planet, I'm just going to kind of let it do its own thing. I just added some, and remember to add the majority of the color to the right side of the planet, because our light source, which is the sun, is coming in from the left. So that is going to be automatically lighter than the rest of it. So everything on the right side is going to be everything on the left side is going to be much lighter than everything on the right side. Once again, I'm going to repeat the process for the fourth planet. And on top of the white, I'm going to add a little bit of Cydonia. Now let's add an orbit of space rocks. That's what I'm going to call them. So I'm going to take some wormhole, which is a black, and I am just going to randomly add a bunch of little rocks on one of the orbit rings between the planets. So the key to this is to make them, not to make them uniform, okay? You don't want them to be all the same size. These are just going to be little chunks and pieces of rocks that are orbiting the sun. So you don't want to have them all the same size. Make them different size. Use the tip of your brush, use the side of your brush to just get varying lengths and widths of rocks. Also, don't make them all in a straight line. You can add a couple that are outside of that line. For the most part, cover up that white line. However, it's not necessary. But make sure that you add a few like little ones hanging off the side. I didn't accomplish that as much here, but you kind of get the gist of it. Okay, now that my rocks are painted in, I am going to add the highlight, or the light parts that are facing the sun. So I'm actually going to try to get as many of the rocks that I have painted as possible. It's pretty quick going because I don't have to keep reloading my brush. And if some of the white turns a little bit gray because I'm not allowing this to dry, I'm just gonna go work right over it, wet on wet. So if it begins to turn a little gray, that's perfectly fine too. If it's just too gray and you can't see the highlight, then just go back in and clean your brush and dip it back in the white. But try to hit as many of the rocks as possible with the white highlights, and make sure that all of the highlights are facing inwards. So don't add highlights to the left side, add all of the highlights to the right side, or as you get closer to the sun, to the very front of the rocks. Next up, let's add splatter. Add lots and lots and lots of splatter. I don't know why, but for this piece, I really wanted to have a ton of splatter in the background. So, you don't have to, but I wanted to add quite a bit. So go ahead and do that now. Now I'm going to add a couple of rings, and I am sorry that that seems to be my MO lately. I just somehow just lose footage, corrupt footage. I don't know what's going on with me, but I'm going to use a very diluted white to form a ring around one planet. And then again, a very diluted white to form like a super, super, super thin ring around the planet on the far right side. And I just want this to be like really thin, barely visible. So the whole thing is looking a little bit bare to me. So I think I'm going to add another line of space rocks. So I'm going to do that to the very first ring. So the very first ring that I drew on the paper is where we're going to add the space rocks. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we did for the first ring of space rocks. So do not make them uniform and add the highlights towards the left side of the rocks. Okay, now that we are done with the main painting of the picture, it is now time to add some details. So we are going to add some stars, some of my glowy stars, the one that start off with, a diamond. And then we're going to add some bigger stars in the form of circles. Go crazy on this, or don't. If you like the way that it looks without all of that, then keep it as is. But you know me, I like to take things overboard. Sometimes I don't know when to stop. Sometimes my stars start little and then end up taking the entire page, as this one right here. But we're going to go with the flow. Add as many or as few of those final detail touches as you would like. And then with that, after all of the details, this piece is finished. It's over. I hope that you enjoyed this one, and I will see you next month with our next tutorial. Bye.